Well, hello there. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabel Denham, with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So, to the front pages, as you might expect, one story dominating. And following Rishi Sunak's leader speech, the Metro headlines, "I'm on track for victory," as they detail how the Prime Minister promises to change Britain and win the next election. Well, the Financial Times says scrapping HS2 is a bid to paint Tories as the party of change. Sunak ignites Tory civil war. That's what The Guardian says about Sunak backflipping on HS2. In the Eye, the Prime Minister promises to reinvest the money saved from scrapping HS2 into other rail projects, as he put it. In the Telegraph, more fallout from the conference, with smoking to be effectively banned for future generations with phased age limits. Huge decisions, they say, to change Britain. While the Daily Mail is calling his announcements a bold and radical policy blitz to transform Britain. And the Daily Express agrees with the headline, "Game Changer, Rishi's radical policy blitz to fix Britain." In other news, the Daily Star reporting on supermarkets having to put security tags on toilet rolls. Oh, a reminder, by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's head to our guests then. Kevin and Annabel are here. Straight to the Telegraph, in fact. Let's have a look at that. Huge decisions even to change Britain. Did it feel radical to you, Annabel?
I certainly think it was more radical than many people were expecting. There was a sense that perhaps Rishi would depend, and right up until the general election, on his competence, on proving that he could steady the ship, that he could halve inflation, perhaps have some economic growth, perhaps a small reduction in the waiting time to the NHS, and so on and so forth. But actually, he's come out and he's thrown down the gauntlet to Labour to see how they are going to respond to this suggestion that he's going to break from the 30-year consensus and from the status quo. The trouble is that really, when you look at the details of the speech, it's hard to see how scrapping HS2, a smoking ban, and A-levels, really setting out a vision for the country. What would 5 years of Rishi Sunak with a mandate for change really look like? I'm not sure that delegates or even the wider public are clear after today.
You look like you've swallowed a fly, to be honest with you. You sit there listening.
I agree with a lot of that analysis, actually, but it's very hard to pretend you're the change after your party has been in power for 13 years, next election, 14 years. Are you going to disown everything that happened? There were kind of three things in that speech, really, wasn't there? Now, replacing A-levels in England's been kicked around a long time. Might be a good idea, might be a bad idea, but it would take a very long time to do. The smoking ban, the New Zealand style, raising the age, I quite like that, but there'll be a lot in his own party, people, libertarians like you, Annabel, who would think that was wrong.
Authoritarian.
But what will he be remembered for? Scrapping HS2. That's what he'll be remembered.
But what is the temptation of the hundreds of other transport projects where the money could be delivered more swiftly? Because this wouldn't have been delivered for nearly 20 years, as he put it.
Yeah, rather like he said, one of the things he's going to deliver is the Manchester Metro link tram to the airport. Well, it already goes there. That's for several years. Let's go through the integrated transport plan, other proposals, and see how many of these have been mentioned before. But of course, what he hopes is give out some goodies to local areas, and the challenge then for Labour is, do you go ahead with that? If you're going to spend the money on those plans, then how could you then go ahead with HS2, which I don't think Labour is officially committed to, but the party will be torn over that. But that's what he'd be remembered for. It didn't feel like a great vision. It didn't feel like a great game changer. It felt like spreadsheet Sunak, going through a few policies which weren't very coherent. If you put them all together, what have you got? You haven't got a big, radical change.
Even though tonight, as we saw, David Cameron tweeted, today's decision on HS2 is the wrong one. It will help to fuel the views of those who argue that we can no longer think or act for the long term as a country, that we're heading in the wrong direction. Boris Johnson then obviously reposted that and says, I agree. So he's got two former prime ministers who are against him, therefore already starting to look like a change candidate from them, isn't he?
Yeah, I thought Beth would be, put that quite right, but also shows they're divided. But what are you changing on? You're changing on a big infrastructure project in which now you've really wasted a lot of money because you haven't followed it through. So if not all change is good.
No,
you know, remember, you can have change for the worse, which I think scrapping HS2 is.
But generally, the whole point about railing against 30 years of political status quo, that he was the agent for change, I sensed as he goes through these projects, you know, right from the Windsor Framework on Northern Ireland, the idea of HS2, which he said he'd spent weeks and months looking at in detail, that he's a bit of a management consultant. So describing himself as the candidate for change, stroke the agent for change, is right. Does he appear like a management consultant to you?
Yes, technocrat is the accusation that's often levelled against him. And, you know, it's quite awkward for Rishi Sunak because, really, if he wanted to shake up the status quo, what he wouldn't do is go and announce yet more plans that cannot be delivered. I mean, does anybody believe that we're going to have better links between northern conurbations in the next 2 to 3 years? No, it probably won't happen until 2040, and it will probably cost 5 times as much as we're estimating now. If he really wanted to break the status quo, he would be implementing radical policies from today, you know, or at least when Parliament returns, instead of plans, proposals, you know, a shake-up of A-levels. That would take years to roll out. I think back in 2003, when the Tomlinson Review happened and they were looking at reforming A-levels, they had a 10-year time frame for it. And Rishi might not even have a year.
Anna, the slogan up there was long-term decisions for a brighter future. Well, HS2 was a long-term project. He's just pulled for a slower future.
6 years of construction.
This was really all about short-term decisions for Rishi Sunak's future, in the hope that, from his point of view, he can salvage his premiership and claw back. I think the latest opinion poll today, it was this morning, so before his speech, was 19% high. There was one that showed the Labour lead only 10% a few days ago. That seems to be a bit of an outlier. So that's what it was about. But is he going to win back the public? Where were the radical ideas on the economy and the cost of living crisis? Where were they on the NHS? The two biggest concerns people have. Often in polling, you see the boats come up as third. Where were the new ideas on? There weren't any. Where was the change on any of those areas? There wasn't any.
Well, it's always interesting to see how the right-leaning papers took the speech. Here we go. The PM's common sense revolution, pride in family, pride in Britain, pride in the party of aspiration and genuine diversity. He talked about his front bench, didn't he? And an unequivocal statement that a man is a woman. A man is a man.
Go on, that was quite a speech he made when he said a man's a woman. Yeah. He embraced change, modern Britain and the world. You know, that's how he did it. Yeah, his conversion to trans rights. So we'll have to welcome that.
A man is a man and a woman is a woman. Apologies. Anyway, they're basically saying saving us from Keir's wokery, which had been a theme of the few days of the conference, had it not as well.
Yeah, but I'm old enough to remember the Daily Mail when it was fully behind Boris Johnson, and then it was fully behind Liz Truss and a budget, which didn't go too well, and they were quite hostile to Rishi Sunak. But of course, on some areas, he has moved towards Truss positions, unquestionably. And so he's now got the Mail, which is still a very powerful voice, paper people can fear if you're on the wrong side of its anger. He'll be pleased the Mail is back in his camp. Or he's in the Mail's camp.
Some of his rhetoric was perhaps more powerful and resonated more with traditional Tory voters than the specific policies that he was announcing. So it's not surprising that there are favourable headlines on the cover of some of the papers. And, you know, when it comes to the NHS, when it comes to the boats, when it comes to the cost of living crisis, arguably he let his Home Secretary, he let his Health Secretary, he let his Chancellor come out and speak on those these issues. And the problem, of course, that Rishi had was that there was a leak early on in the conference about the scrapping of the northern leg of HS2. And, I mean, how many times were we briefed that it was happening, it wasn't happening, it was happening again? 9, was it, over the course of the conference? So that rather took the wind out of his sails.
Well, yesterday, he was in interviews, he was saying, oh, God, they've got to really study this. I'm the man who has to look at all the figures and make them. I can't announce it now. And then look at that, less than 24 hours later, he can't announce it.
Well, he had to brief his cabinet, I suppose, didn't he? The Metro... Rishi, I'm on track for victory. The PM scraps HS2. He tells the Tories it's time for change. New exams plus a law to end generation of children smoking. Tax cuts, but not yet. You know, another area of difficulty. But I want to go to the
tax at the, is it post-war record high?
Yeah.
People will be worse off at the next election than they were at the last one.
We'll talk about that in a moment, but I do want to talk about the eye and something that you mentioned, which is the gauntlet thrown down to Labour about what they now choose to fund and how expensive, if they fund everything, it could be for them. It could be a monstrous bill, couldn't it?
Yeah, we won't really know the state of politics and the battlefield for the election until at the end of next week, when this time next week, when Labour's had its conference. Normally Labour goes before the Conservatives, but not this time. I think it was a booking cock-up that resulted in this. But anyway,
they could have swapped location. It might have been easier.
I know. You get the last word, and Labour have now got something to attack because Sunak's made his speech. So it's harder for the Tories this time. But of course, the challenge here, I think, what the eye is referring to is if we have that HS2 money, which is now said to be going to spent around the country. Are Labour going to say they're not going to do those projects wherever they are? And if they say that, then are they going to say they're going to do HS2 as well? And then where would you get the money for that? So I can see there's a big choice for Labour. And it's also in the Labour Party, about HS2, it's who you ask, because you have different answers on whether they're going to go ahead with it or not. Andy Street, the Tory mayor of West Midlands, seems to have been bought off by the government. He was screaming blue murder about cancelling HS2. Now he's sort of nodded it through. Wow. I suspect Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester mayor, will be a little tougher proposition for Keir Starmer. Yeah,
well, let's have a look at the Manchester Evening News, shall we? Effectively suggesting it's all broken promises. Back to George Osborne. The reality is that HS2 is a vital investment. It will change the economic geography of the country. Question is how you do that now without that. And you know, the suggestion is that, you know, you've got Zoom and Teams and all the other mechanisms for having meetings. You don't need this route up the country, the T-bar they talk about. You know, you've chopped off that bit, you can still do that bit across the country in terms of transport.
Well, I don't think there was ever really a strong economic case for HS2 to begin with before a single spade had even gone into the ground. And that much was clear because there was no private sector involvement. The private sector looked at HS2 and thought they didn't want anything to do with it. And I think that was a pretty strong indicator.
How did it ever, you know, roll through then?
Yeah, but we
an idea that it would level up the country. But, of course, if you look at the high-speed rail line to Darlington, actually what that did was lead to more people from Darlington coming down to London rather than incentivising people to move out of the capital into
Annabel, if we'd have relied on the private sector for HS1, the link from St Pancras to the Channel Tunnel, it wouldn't have happened because it went bust when it was being built. It had to be nationalised, publicly run, and now it's a huge success. The private sector is not always the answer. I know the public sector isn't always the answer, but that's why this line had to be built
but I mean,
publicly.
I think in the case of HS2, it's absolutely apparent that the economic case is completely imploded, and it's of course been exacerbated, like you say, Anna, by lockdowns and the fact that commuter travel still hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels.
Some lines it has.
And I think ultimately it was probably needlessly ambitious. The speed that they wanted it to go at, they underestimated how much it was going to cost and the amount of resistance they would get from
the NIMBYs want tunnels everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tunnels, aren't there, I think, on the way to Birmingham. Somebody gave a time for how many times during daylight. It's not actually very long. Anyway, lots more still to come, including from the front of The Guardian, the headline, England, most difficult place to find a home. That and more after this. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview once again, joined by Kevin Maguire and Annabel Denham. I'm going to show you a quick look at the Times, which we hadn't had before. Son of a pharmacist casts himself as Thatcher's heir alongside his wife Akshata. A good thing, bad thing? You liked it or didn't like her appearance today?
I liked it. I can appreciate that some people will feel it was saccharine and staged, but I thought it gave Rishi a sort of a human side that has been lacking. He seems to, over the last 12 months, have become increasingly robotic. And this was a reminder of his commitment to his family, to his country, the duty that he quite obviously feels. And I thought she delivered it. I thought she delivered it so well. She was charming and confident.
Yeah.
And
don't mention she's an heiress and a cost of living crisis. No, I thought it was quite sweet. I'm sure she's a very nice woman. I don't believe when she said, "Oh, he doesn't know what I'm going to say." That'll have all been gloriously scripted. But if he thinks it's going to save him, I just mentioned that when Sarah Brown introduced Gordon Brown, I think it was twice, 2008, then 2009. Everybody says it's really lovely.
Somebody else who hadn't been chosen.
Yeah, really.
Somebody else who'd had a coronation for the job.
And it was really nice, and it made no difference at all once she got the post.
In fact, 1 year later, it made no difference, did it? Let's go to The Guardian, shall we? England, the most difficult place to find a home. Many people suggesting, actually, that the no mention of housing in Rishi Sunak's speech was quite interesting. But what's this, Annabel, what's this article saying?
Yes, well, this is data from the Home Builders Federation. It says that England has the lowest percentage of vacant homes per capita in the OECD, and around a quarter of private renters are spending more than 40% of their income on renting a home, which is a shocking statistic. So little disposable income left for anything else, for saving or indeed spending. And of course, you know, just bringing it back to Conservative Party conference to Rishi Sunak. So now you're 25 and you can't smoke, but you can't buy a home and you probably can't rent a home either.
But the interest rates are smoking out private landlords because of policy changes brought in by George Osborne during the austerity years as Chancellor. So that's partly what's biting there.
Yeah, to stop them basically, you know, the loans, writing them all off against tax. So if, you know, houses were built and they went out for sale, they were all bought by private landlords and then were being rented out. So no other people could buy it. I know I can feel you're going to explode on this. But there is a housing crisis in the UK. There's more than 1 million people on social waiting lists. And what has Sunak done as the change man? He's scrapped the housing targets.
I think that landlords...
I mean, he is part of the problem here.
I think that landlords are just the convenient whipping boy for successive Conservative governments. They're a boogeyman or woman of the British economy, and there's this assumption they can just be clobbered and regulations piled on them, and that this won't have consequence. And all it is doing is forcing more and more landlords to leave the sector, and that means that prices are going to go up.
Well, let's buy them up then. Let's give the tenants a right to buy. And nationalise them. Yeah, that's great. Expand the public, housing association and council sector. I agree with you.
OK, we didn't get to the Daily Star and the tagged toilet rolls. Perhaps we can do that next time. Kevin, Annabel, thank you both very much indeed.